Welcome back to another episode of Treknicity Live, Trekkies and Trekkers. I'm your host, Lars the Scenza, coming to you from somewhere beyond the cosmos. This is the Star Trek show where I talk about everything I want to talk about. You guessed it, Star Trek. Because here on Treknicity Live, no topic is taboo. And to get right into it, this episode is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Now, in my previous episode that I did live on Monday, I talked about Star Trek The Next Generation and pretty much how much I loved it to death, and I probably rambled on tons and tons and tons about it. But you know what? It's my show, so if I want to ramble, I'll ramble on. The thing is, I really want to do this show as basically a work of passion, and and I just want to talk about Star Trek. I don't care really how much I stay on topic fully or whatnot. I just want to do this to have some fun and talk about Star Trek. The other thing it really does for me is that it gets me back in front of the camera, being real, being out there for everybody to see and talk to or look at, whatever. That being said, I'm going to get right stuck into it. Let's talk about Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine premiered right before the end of TNG, which TNG ended in '94. I believe DS9 premiered in '93. As has kind of been the way they hand off the series to some degree, the Enterprise shows up to bring the new Starfleet crew to the recently liberated Empok Nor, which is was the Cardassian name for the space station they built around Bajor. Bajor had been subjugated by the Cardassians for a very long time. They have now been freed, and they are taking over the station. And they brought in the Federation to help them out. That being the case, Commander Benjamin Sisko, played by Avery Brooks, shows up with his son Jake. And they basically they're there to kind of take over and run the place. Although to some degree there's some consternation, there's some pushback from the Cardassians there, or at least the Cardassian who's put in charge of being the liaison to the Federation, which that being Kira Nerys, played by Nana Visitor, and then there was the security chief who had been there even during the Cardassian occupation of Bajor, that being Odo, and so you have some bitterness between Sisko and Picard, because we find out that in the aforementioned episode, two-part episode, Best of Both Worlds, parts 1 and 2 for TNG, the Battle of Wolf 359, where the Borg basically pasted Starfleet and handed their rear ends to them. It was Commander Sisko's wife was killed during that battle, which made him a single father, and he's coming to Deep Space Nine to basically run the place. And so not only does he have to deal with hating Picard and wanting to get off the ship so he can get on the station, he has to deal with staff being Kira Nerys, and of course Odo, and not wanting to have to deal with them because he's basically getting a bunch of pushback for things he didn't want to be responsible for. So I mean, there's other Federation personnel. There is Jadzia Dax, who is a conjoined Trill, who has been around, whose symbiote has been around for a very, very long time, and that's a long story about the Dax symbiote. There is Dr. Julian Bashir, who has a mega crush on Dax, and as well you have Chief O'Brien, who was the transporter chief of the Enterprise during Next Generation. In this show, he's more of an engineer / handyman. He fixes everything that's broken. He does a lot of stuff. He's married to Keiko. They have a little girl named Molly. And yeah, I mean, it's just you spend 8 seasons watching this show really take off. Now the cool thing is in the first episode in the pilot, what they discover is discover a the only known stable wormhole in the actual galaxy. They check it out. They find out that this is a stable wormhole that is going all the way to the Delta Quadrant, which is going to open up massive amounts of trade. So they move the station right in its way, so they can kind of basically be the port of call for the wormhole, and then it's hit the ground running both feet from there. Now, admittedly, I will be honest with you. I have not seen every episode of Deep Space Nine. Now, given the fact that it's been around for many, many years, you would think that I would have watched everything. But life does that thing it does and gets in the way, and I go through upheavals left, right, and center. Then I go, and of course, I'm in New Zealand for a long time, and trying to watch Star Trek there was a pain in the rear end because when I got there, they only had 3 channels, and nobody was showing Star Trek at all. So I don't know all the stories, but I know that that there was a lot of great. From what I have seen, you see, the big. I guess for me, the big bad guy for a long time was the Cardassian, who was the commander of the station before they were booted out, and that was Gul Dukat. And he actually shows back up later late in the series after he disappears. And I won't spoil how he shows back up, but it's pretty cool. It's actually really kind of sneaky and cool. During the one thing I really do want to talk about is during the run of Deep Space Nine, they had the war. This was called the Dominion War. This race of people who came through the wormhole from the Delta Quadrant and basically said, "Hey, you know what? We're the Dominion. We're here to make your life better, and by better we mean we're going to subjugate you, and we're going to make you do things our way, or you're going to be destroyed." And through that, we find first of all they have an army of clones who are addicted to a drug known as Ketracel White. They're called the Jem'Hadar. And then we have we have Weyoun, who basically is the mouthpiece of the Dominion. The Dominion is basically controlled by the Founders. Now we find out that the Founders, the race that Odo is, I didn't mention before, but Odo is a shapeshifter, and he has no idea where he's from. But we find out that this race referred to as the Founders, they are the same race, and they kind of entice him, try to bring him over a little bit, and bring him onto their side. He ends up doing a fantastic job of serving his crew and countrymen in that series. So, the thing is, for me, Deep Space Nine is and always will be at least at this point. I can't say what will happen even with Star Trek Discovery, but for me, Deep Space Nine, from what I've seen of it, is very much the darkest Star Trek that there's been. Not so much in action or whatnot, but primarily in the whole thing about it being you had the Dominion War, and it is full on. It is war. The Klingons get involved, the Romulans get involved, the Breen get involved, and there's all this sorts of stuff. Stories we find out that General Martok, who is played by a very talented man by the name of J.G. Hertzler, he ends up being when the guy they find, he was kidnapped. They find him. They figure out, he's a shapeshifter. He's a founder in disguise, and he tries to basically sow insurgency and sedition from within the Federation and their allies, trying to destabilize them so that the Dominion can win the war. Armin Shimmerman as Quark, of course, the Ferengi. He's a member of the Ferengi race that I mentioned before. Does a really good job of being a slime ball, just an absolute slime ball. His brother Rom is played by Max Grodenchik. And of course, Rom's son Nog is played by Aaron Eisenberg, who on a previous episode, I think it was the Red Shirt Diaries. No, sorry, the Red Shirt Interviews. Red Shirt Diaries, big, very different story. That's Jason Inman and Ashley Victoria Robinson. Very funny show. You have to go check it out. Go look up Red Shirt Diaries. But that also being said, great stories, very hard hitting, but also some lighter ones. I love the episode where they go to the Hollow Suite and they play baseball, because Captain Sisko, Ben Sisko, is a huge baseball fan, and they just have this really cool thing, and they bring baseball into the 24th century. Lots of fun. That series ended on the note that it was, we start to see some things. Going back a little bit, the Bajorans are very religious, very religious. They believe that the gods live in the wormhole, in the gods that they worship. Also, they have these orbs. Basically, the orbs are do different things. They can time travel, they allow you to get enlightenment, wisdom, that sort of stuff. And we see them appear several times where they are used in one fashion or another. And at the end of the series, Ben Sisko learns some truths from the aliens, these gods, so to speak, from the Delta Quadrant, the wormhole, and all that. And it turns out it's very, very bittersweet. There's not a whole lot more I can say about it. I know I really I've probably glossed over a little bit, and I'm not intending to do that purposely. I just want to kind of hit the high points for me, because, quite frankly, the only opinion I can give you, the only perspective I can give you is mine, and I like giving you my opinion, whether it's solicited or not. I like to share what I love about Star Trek. There practically isn't anything about these series that I don't like as far as the overall story, the overall feel of things. I've got my nitpicking here and there of different stuff, and that'll be taken care of in another episode later on. But you gotta watch Deep Space Nine. You can't watch Voyager unless you watch Deep Space Nine. You can't watch Deep Space Nine unless you watch TNG. Now, admittedly, they are very much independent of each other, so insofar as that what takes place kind of just happens out on its own in different bits and different places, different things. But they do find ways to mesh again, to get in there and really, really get together and tell those stories. Definitely check out Deep Space Nine, especially if you like the grittier stories, because they're not flying off into some uncharted territory where they're exploring the galaxy. They're keeping it pretty close to where they're at, except for, hopping through the wormhole and going to the Delta Quadrant and checking some things out. That being said, that's all I've got for Deep Space Nine right now. Next episode, which will be on Friday, we'll be talking about Star Trek Voyager. I know some people who live and breathe by Voyager. Not my favorite series, but there are some moments that I do like, and I have some funny stories from gaming as well. When I played Star Trek back in New Zealand as a role-playing game. Lots of fun. So, anyways, that's going to be it for me for now. Have fun, be good to each other, and as always, rock out with your Spock out. See ya, folks.